Folks, the chills run down my spine as we hit episode 59 of an ongoing series where we basically take the camera anywhere we want and we try to find secrets and new discoveries to some of our favorite games. This episode might be a little bit on the shorter side, but I do hope you can appreciate the work that went into it. I mean, we actually had to have Necorun make this camera specifically for this episode because one didn't exist prior to this. But anyways, guys, I hope you enjoy it, and with that said, let's get going. So before I go over everything that makes Crash Bandicoot so special in its own little way, I actually want to show you some traditional boundary breaking type stuff. Now this is probably the most interesting thing that I could find that wasn't completely removed by the developers. Here in this boss fight with Dr. Nitrous Brio, you might notice that there's two colors underneath his feet, red and green. Well, at first I couldn't quite figure out what the reason was for this, but then as I watched more footage, it clicked. See, what those two color stripes actually are is liquid. Every single time Dr. Nitrous Brio mixed concoctions in his beaker, these two strips are summoned from underneath his feet and then transplanted to the bottles to serve the animation. But when he's not mixing the potions, that liquid is once again stored underneath his feet. Funny enough, the camera used to only work with levels and not cutscenes, but due to a stroke of luck, I'm actually able to see all these scenes from a different angle now. And the first thing I want to look at is the title screen itself. Very iconic. Crash runs up to the front of the screen and then he winces as the title screen starts to fly into the scene. And if we turn the camera around, you can actually see where the sign begins and what's the actual distance and depth between the sign and Crash himself. And then when the title screen fades into a demo, you can actually see Crash sink into the ground. Another part that you wouldn't even think as a cutscene is when Crash starts the first level and he's washed up on the beach. Here you can see ocean waves crashing onto the island, but you can't see them all that well. And very much to my surprise, when you zoom the camera out during this one particular part, there is a huge texture that represents the ocean, which means an enormous part of this ocean has never been seen by players before. But interestingly enough, for the very first few frames that you can actually control Crash, the ocean water just remains for just a little bit and then disappears forever. Some of the other cutscenes I was able to look at was the opening cutscene for the game. Unfortunately, due to the scripting, there isn't much to see outside of the boundaries here. However, in a scene where Dr. Nitro Brio is pranking Crash into the machine, we can actually turn the camera around to see that Crash seems totally fine with this. Maybe they gave him a little bit of a lobotomy before the procedure. And over here in the scene with Tana, there isn't much to look at either, but we can take the camera from a different angle and show you the various windows that show you a sky on the other side. Okay, so this needs to be explained. Zoom outs in a Crash Bandicoot episode will not look that great, and it's actually not because of culling. It certainly looks like culling, and if you don't know what culling is, I recommend you check out my Wii Sports Resort episode where I explain it in detail. I'll leave a link to that in the video description. But yeah, apparently this is not culling. If it were, we could actually get rid of it now. This is actually something much more complicated. See, in Crash Bandicoot, you may notice that you have no manipulation of the camera whatsoever. Even when Crash can kind of get up on little corners and stuff like that, the camera typically doesn't follow him, and it's for a very specific reason. And as Django from Banjo's Backpack explains, he said that the game has lists of what to draw at certain positions along the path that Crash Bandicoot walks on. And so depending on what position Crash is when he's walking along, determines the order that the game decides to draw the environment. I'm sure a lot of you dedicated Crash Bandicoot fans have already heard the tales of the amazing technical ingenuity that went into making this game possible, pushing it to the brink of the PlayStation's hardware. Well, this unusual method here was just another step that added to Crash Bandicoot's absurd development legacy. When Crash does this idle animation where he throws a Wampa fruit up into the air, thinks it's never going to come back down, and then it splats him on the face, it leaves a little bit of a mess. What a neat little Easter egg to leave inside your game. But if we zoom the camera way out, we can actually see that the Wampa fruit actually gets thrown way high into the sky and travels back down organically to land on Crash's head, though this would never ever be seen by the player. So adding this level of detail was completely unnecessary, because as you can see, other things in Crash Bandicoot don't use this method, like for example this spider enemy right here. Although you can see the spider queued up and ready to drop down before it actually does, and that happens to be off camera, most of the time that the spider's off camera, it actually ceases to exist for a while. Which actually makes another great segue into bats! These bats in particular seem to have a very realistic look to them, which changed completely in the remake. But the reason why we're looking at these bats in conjunction with the spider is because in certain segments of Crash Bandicoot, these guys will have a flight path that can potentially kill Crash. Now, although they disappear immediately after finishing their flight path, these little bratty baddies actually get all bundled up into one position and then take turns going through the flight path. So you can see all the bats bundled and frozen in one spot. So next I want to look at the character model for Crash. Now the regular character model doesn't really have much to show, but if we freeze the game while Crash is spinning, we can see something very interesting. What we got here is a 3D model of Crash spinning. Now in a lot of 3D games these days, they don't go through the trouble of actually making a 3D model that looks like it's spinning. No, instead they would actually just spin the character model really fast. But for Crash Bandicoot, there's a separate character model for when Crash is spinning. And you know what? There's actually another thing that we can look at by just freezing the game. People want to know just how far enemies go when Crash actually hits them with the spin dash. And as we use this enemy as an example, we can stop the game to catch up to where the enemy is and be able to travel with it. And then when we see where the enemy disappears, we can then measure the distance between where it stopped and where it started. Crash being where it started, of course. And using the same technique, we can actually see just how far the checkpoint text actually goes when Crash smashes the box. And as you can see by pulling out the camera here, that text goes some ways away before it actually starts to disappear. Once again, the red circle represents where it ended, and Crash represents where it started. And another enemy that I want to look at real quick before we move on is the snake. The reason why I want to look at the snake is because it has a unique pattern on its back that's very difficult to see when you're playing the game normally. But since we can manipulate the camera any way we want, you can see all the unique textures that the developers use to give its own special design. Now, although the programmers are able to decide exactly what to get rid of outside of the boundaries at any given position on the map because of how linear it is, I was able to find one instance of environment that's off camera that is rendered but cannot be seen. In the Boulder Dash level, the boulder covers up most of the environment. And what's interesting is that there's a tiki head at the start of the boulder cycle. So although the tiki head isn't fully rendered here, in this exact position that Crash is at right now, we can see a very good portion of it when we move the camera up. Alright, let's talk about a couple of the bosses. Ripper Roo we'll start off with is one of all the bosses that have a very restricted camera. You can't move it in any sort of direction to see what it looks like. Well, thankfully now we can see what this boss area looks like, at least from a different perspective. Granted, you're not going to see much of anything different as far as what environments there are, based off of what we learned already, but you can see here that the TNT boxes actually last quite a bit of time before they disappear off screen. Same can be said for Koala Kong. While he's throwing boulders at Crash, boulders actually hang in a position after they're off screen. And as for Pinstripe, again, there's not much to find behind the table or anything else that can't be seen by the player, but there is something that's been in plain sight that we can now get a better look at, which is this weird crude drawing that clearly says Pin, representing Pinstripe, on Pinstripe's rug. And now we're going to do a zoom out of the final area of the game where Tana rides off with Crash Bandicoot after 100%ing the game. I'll take a moment to just mention right now that Crash Bandicoot 2 and 3 are very likely, but I do have my eyes set on something a little bit bigger, and hopefully in the very near future we can come up with a Crash Bandicoot episode that's a little more insane. You might notice that there's some really weird lighting right now. It's because we were testing it out with a shoot that we were doing earlier, and we know it's ridiculous looking. Pat, you seem to think it's professional looking.
You know, white light makes a difference when it comes to exuding detail in filmography.
Okay. Anyways, thank you guys so much for watching. Deco Run, he made the camera for this game. Please, if you can do anything for me, outside of checking out Game Club, check out his channel also in the video description down below. But as far as anything else goes, Pat, what do you think? Are we done?
I think we could roll on out of here.
Guys, I really hope you liked it. I bet you hated that intro, though. I expect no views this week. We'll see. Anyways, guys, take care.
I hope you catch the Easter egg.
There's an Easter egg. Oh. Alright guys, bye.